Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Family Business, where I am thrilled to introduce you to Carsten Schroeder. He is the leader and president of Microvention Terumo, and I've had the honor of knowing him for a long time, and I think he'd be perfect for what we're trying to do here, where we're intertwining careers and family. Carsten, thanks so much for being here. I'm glad you're on the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
It was a very easy decision. Could you take just 1 minute in the beginning just to give people a quick snapshot of what you're doing and where you're at now so we can get some context and then we can get into some of the fun stuff?
Sure. So I'm the president and CEO of a company called Microvention, which is one of the leader in the field of endovascular treatment of aneurysms and ischemic stroke. And it now belongs to the Terumo Group, which is or maybe 5.5 billion medical device group in Japan.
And so you're relatively new there, right?
Oh yeah, I started 3 months ago, at the beginning of November.
You know, I've never had a chance to ask this question after 20 years of recruiting, so you're first. So I realize COVID is not a fair depiction, but what is onboarding like for a CEO? Like, does HR have you fill out paperwork? Like, what happens?
Oh, I go through the same paperwork exercise, the I-9, the benefits, and everything like everybody else. So there's no change. But onboarding as a CEO in the middle of a pandemic is quite strange because I'm very limited in physical interaction. I can't walk through the offices because most of the people are working from home. And the town halls are done virtually when I introduce myself. And I'm more of a face-to-face person, so it's a bit strange.
I would say so. Now, do you feel like that you've been able to make the connection, or you still think that there's more to make because the physicality of it and the proximity of it is so difficult?
I'm happy with what I have been able to do virtually. We've had lots of virtual meetings with the senior leaders. I was in the office in November because the pandemic was a little bit better back then, and some people came in, masks on and everything. But I'm looking forward to the point where I can actually go into the labs and the engineers can explain me the products, and I can see production more often in different stages than I can do it right now.
Does this, though, offer you an opportunity to be creative and to do things that have never been done before? Because you're completely in uncharted waters, so you can kind of do whatever you want.
To a certain extent, yes. So, for instance, as you know, in our business, there's a lot of proctoring when new products are being introduced, meaning people who have used the products many times proctor other physicians. And that proctoring is usually done face-to-face. Now we can't do proctoring face-to-face, so we're using software solutions, remote videos and things in order to do that. So yes, that makes us creative.
When I look at your background, you have that poster child or picture perfect background. You have a significant stay at just about every company you're ever at. You have progression at every company you were ever at. You have depth at every company you're ever at, and certainly success and credibility. And I'm curious, now that the world has somewhat shifted for you and I in the respects that people stay at companies for 2-3 years and they move on, you know, was that a difficult transition for you to start accepting the fact that people aren't going to be like you?
It's an interesting question. Let me answer the following way. I talk to students. I'm part of the Santa Clara University Bioinnovation Lab board. And one thing I do there is I mentor, or I act as a sounding board for students, usually in their junior year. And so they come to me and they have these wonderful plans. So this is what I want to do. This is what I want to give back to the community. And after 2 years, I want to do this. And then after 2 years, I want to do this. And I sort of, whoa, wait a minute. And then, so I usually ask them then, okay, so how long do you think you will work? Well, what do you mean? Well, you're now, 20, 21. How long do you think you will actually work? And then, so they pause a little bit and said, well, you will probably work for 45 years. So what's the rush to pack all of the career aspirations in the first 5 years? And that usually makes them think a little bit. And then I give them, my advice is usually along the lines of be a little bit more patient. Don't try to do everything in the first 2 or 3 years. Get a solid foundation, get a good training, know what your strengths are, and then apply these strengths somewhere else. So my father's generation was still, you enter a company and 40 years later you exit the company. Well, that's long gone. Mm-hmm. But job hopping every 2 years, I'm not sure that's the best solution either.
I don't think so either. I don't see how you form relationships. I mean, sometimes companies get bought. Sometimes things happen. Of course, your spouse gets a job, you move. I mean, this is the nature of life.
Yep.
But when it's your choice, it's an interesting, because for you, and this is where I get into an area that I don't know much about you, is that your background looks so picture perfect, but yet in the beginning, while you were in school, you were part of the military in NATO, which I didn't know. And so I want to take you back a bit. Like, what were you doing for NATO, and give me a bit of an understanding of that, because I only know you professionally. I don't know you from that particular era.
So allow me to go back to, I guess, one important turning point, which was very early in my life. In Germany, in 5th grade, and I'm talking 5th grade, you need to make a choice of a school. And in the town I was in, there was a school that was founded after the friendship treaty between France and Germany, where you could start learning French in 5th grade, not English, French. And my parents decided that I should do that. So I was tested whether my language skills were good enough, and I was borderline. Yeah, you can put him into French, or you can put him into English. And my parents decided we'll put him into French. And that gave me very strong Francophile influence throughout my whole life. So I have the high school diploma from the normal German public system, but I also have the baccalaureate from the French system because of that particular schooling system. And back then in Germany, you needed to do your military service after graduating from your high school. When you were 18, you had to do your military service. And at the time, it was 15 months in the mid-80s. So I enlisted for 2 years because I wanted to get a posting outside of Germany. I wanted to use my French language skills, and I also needed the money. If you enlist, you get 4 times more money than when you are a normal soldier. Huh. And I needed the money to pay for my studies. So I enlisted, I went through a selection process, and I was admitted at this NATO school. And then they sent me out to the military headquarters in Belgium to work in the public relations department for the 4-star American general.
That's stunning. And so did you know what you were signing up for? Like, did you understand what you're getting yourself into, or was it just, you just closed your eyes and jumped?
Well, I knew that it was a 2-year assignment, and I knew that there was the sort of basic military training, English training, NATO training, and then you needed to have a position available. And there was one position available, and I had the best French language skills of all the year, and I insisted on being tested on the highest English level skill, and I passed. So they chose me for this particular posting at the NATO headquarters.
Yeah, what also is interesting about Carsten is that he speaks French, English, German, but as well Mandarin, Portuguese, and Spanish. And so
spoke is probably the better description.
Yeah, you still know that.
At some point in my life, I was fluent in all of these languages.
Yeah.
Usually when I lived in these countries, but when you don't use these languages, then sort of they dwindle away.
It's funny, what stays with you is the bad words. You always remember how to say the profanity. For some reason that sticks. Yeah, so it's funny. I was telling you this earlier, that there's always something about people that I learn when I do these conversations that I just didn't know about you. And so your family has always been a large part of our conversations, and I know how dedicated you are to them. So give everybody a bit of a context. You have, I'm trying to remember, is it 2 or 3 children?
2.
2, okay. And they're how old now? Because they're adults now, yeah?
Oh yeah. So they are 24 and 21, and the 24-year-old is a daughter. She's doing her master degree, and the younger one is finishing his bachelor.
And so, with all of the things that you've done from a professional standpoint, how often were they a part of those decisions on going to Boston Scientific, on going to Grifols and Novartis, and obviously now here? I mean, how much did you stop and say, okay, I need to sit down with my wife and we need to organize what we're doing as a family because where we live is important and all those types of things?
That obviously depends on age, right? So my wife has always been part of all of these decisions. We've known each other. We met at business school, so we've known each other for 30 years. We've been married for 26 this year. So when the kids were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I mean, we didn't ask them.
No.
But as teenagers, absolutely yes.
Yeah.
We said, hey, Dad has been presented with this opportunity. Would mean this and that and the other. And so we always talk to them. Now, to what extent they really understand what that means when they're 10, you can question, but when they are 17 or 16 or 9, I mean, then they really understand what it means.
Is there anything that they asked you to turn down?
No, but they were very reluctant to some moves were very easy for them. Because they weren't particularly happy. Other moves were, let's say, a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, well, look, and with kids, it changes every 6 months. Their mentality,
Yes.
their friends, their activities, all those kinds of things. It sounds like your wife deserves a bit of a medal for all.
Oh, she does. Oh, yeah, more than one.
So, with you and your family, there are a few things that seem to follow you wherever you go, and one of them is animals. And I know horses and dogs and everything else. Now, I guess what was your first pet, and how did it turn into this lifelong relationship with all animals?
So when we lived in France, near Paris, we lived there for 5 years, from 2001 to 2006. This is when we had our first dog. We got the first dog in 2002, and then 6 months later, I found another dog in the forest, so we adopted her.
In the forest, really?
And in the forest, yeah. I was literally driving on a Saturday morning, driving through the forest to another town to pick up croissants and baguette for breakfast. And I see this black Labrador running onto the street. And I was slowing down because I was waiting for the mountain biker or the runner to come right behind the dog. But there was no mountain biker, there was no runner. So it was just this dog. So I drove around it. And then on the way back, the dog was sitting there. So I stopped, and then I called my wife and I said, do you have a leash? So we picked up the dog, and in France, you have to bring the dog to the lost and found. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't doing very well. It had fleas and open wounds and another air. And then after a couple of weeks, we adopted it.
What'd you call him?
We called it Tosca.
That's fantastic. I love hearing things like that. And so what was their health easy to fix and just basic stuff?
Yeah. See, we had access to good vet. We took care of that.
Ah, that's fantastic. So how many dogs since then?
So that was 2 dogs. The other one was called Pamina because we are big opera fans. So that's why one was called Pamina, the other one was called Tosca. Mm-hmm. And they stayed with us. They moved with us to Germany. They moved with us to Boston. They moved with us back to Switzerland, and then here to the Bay Area. So they died here in the Bay Area, and then since then we've had more adopted dogs. There was a beagle which was old and essentially we knew it had 1 or 2 years left. And now we have a pit bull, and he was left at a Home Depot we adopted. And we have what we believe is probably a mixture between a Dachshund and a Chihuahua. So these are two dogs that we have now.
A Dachshund and a Chihuahua? All right, you got to send me a picture of that. So I got a dog, my first dog last year. In the middle of the beginning of the pandemic, we got the dog, and I go to the dog park all the time. And I will say this to you, I am completely converted on pit bulls. I thought, from what I read and what I've seen, that they're not safe and always to be cognizant of how dangerous they can be. Meanwhile, when you go, the friendliest, kindest, sweetest, the dogs that roll over on their back almost immediately when they meet you are pit bulls. And so I've come full circle on that breed. And I don't know if yours is the same, but I can't get over how sweet those dogs are. Every time I meet them, it's the same routine.
I have a very, very similar experience there, Matt. So Elizabeth, my wife, she volunteered in the shelter where the pit bull is called Henry, where he was. And she does animal energy healing techniques, Elizabeth.
Oh, okay.
So she did like Reiki on him just to calm him down. And so I came to visit him for the first time. I was impressed by the big mouth and the big head that he has.
Yeah.
I said, oh, whoa. And so I was a little bit apprehensive, and he is the sweetest thing ever.
Yep.
The moment you pet him, he rolls over, and yeah. So yes, pit bulls do have a bad reputation, but you can pretty much turn any dog into bad dog, or and vice versa. It's really a question of education.
Now, how do they get along with the horses?
So we do not let them run loose with the horses because one of the horses is afraid of dogs.
Okay.
So we get them together, but there's always, they say there's a fence or and there's stalls. So there needs to be some security between particular one horse and the dogs.
So, because you have so many hobbies, do your kids want to do what you do, or have they formed their own hobbies? Do they push back the traditional, I don't want to do what my parents do kind of thing? Or does everyone love to ride and all the other things that you like to do?
So it was actually the other way around. It was my daughter in 2005 started to get interested in horse riding. And so that we lived in France at the time, and there were pony clubs. So she went to the local pony club. She made it into the French, I think it was 2006, she qualified for the French pony mastership and things like that. And then when we eventually moved to Boston, she continued to ride. And when we arrived in Switzerland in 2010, we were given to understand, well, here you have to own your horse. You can't just use it as a school horse. You have to buy a horse. So we bought a horse. And awesome. That was horse number one. That was, I think, March 2010. And then a couple of months later, maybe 6-7 months later, same stable, another horse came in, a school horse, was lame, and we rescued him because he essentially was on the way to the butcher. So that became horse number two. So, and these two horses then moved with us here to California in 2012.
Can the lame horse, can you ride him?
Yes, not aggressively, but you can walk you can walk him. You can ride him in the walk. You can do groundwork with him. You can do work in the round pen. There's one misconception. Not misconception. People always look at horses as if you have to ride them. Well, that's one way of doing it, but there's lots of other things. There are things called groundwork, horsemanship, other things that you can do with them where you do not necessarily have to exhaust them. You need to keep their mind busy. You need to establish a connection between the horse and yourself. So there's various other things, other activities you can do with horses other than riding.
Well, all right, I'm picking up all kinds of pearls from you. I would have never thought there were other things to do. Because, when we've talked in the past, and you've mentioned a couple of times, you have this deep interest and affection for opera and classical music. Now, are you a musician?
No. I learned to play the piano a little bit. I play very badly. My wife plays much better. Even my son said he learns it much faster than I've ever done. But I just like to listen to music. When it was still possible, we've always been members here of the San Francisco Symphony or in other cities where we live. We always go to concerts and ballets and things.
What's the opera that you enjoy the most? You've seen so many. Which one sticks with you?
So there's my favorite of all times on the comedy side. It's the Mariage of Figaro, the Wedding of Figaro from Mozart. That's my absolute favorite. And then on the tragic side is La Traviata by Verdi.
So during my honeymoon, 19 years ago, we were in Italy, and my wife and I looked at each other because we didn't grow up with much. We didn't know from anything that I would consider would be artistic and at that level. And we went to an opera, and I don't even remember which one it was because there was no libretto, and I didn't understand any of it. Of course, it's all in Italian, and it's 4 hours.
Oh, God.
4 hours long. And I'm, you know me a little bit, but you don't know me personally this way. Like, I have zero patience. And so for 4 hours, I had to sit there. And then when you come out on the break, they said, how do you get a drink? And I didn't understand. You had to go to the bar and you get it there. No, excuse me. You go to the cash register and pay first. And then you go to the bar and they give the ticket and they give you the drink. So my wife and I missed the whole opportunity to get something to drink because we did it wrong. And then the last piece is that you come out and there's a person sitting there at a table with a phone and they call a taxi for you. Well, if you don't have the person call you, there's no taxi for you. So we had to walk home in the middle of the night in Rome. The two of us, like, that was our opera experience. And we're like, you know what? I think we're done.
He said never again.
With the opera. Yeah. I think I was one and done. What is this I read about you with action sports? What does that mean?
Action sports.
Yeah, I saw something NOLO action sports with whether it's car racing or.
Oh no. So that's a friend of ours.
Oh, okay.
So he is the he used to I think still does. Do you know what Baja Mille is down? So he races Baja Mille in old Volkswagen Beetles or Bugs.
Holy cow!
I follow him a little bit because I have an old Volkswagen from the body's from 1966. I wish I could repair it and restore it, but my manual dexterity is still improving. Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
And so that's a friend of ours. He does this for hobby.
So when I look at your career, I try to imagine like how many people you've developed and promoted and hired, and I guess and fired. I suppose I should include that too. That happens also. When you look back on that, with all the leadership that you've done, where do you get the most satisfaction or fulfillment? Is it from the development? Is it from when they leave and go on to their next position that you help them leave the nest? I'm curious what happens from a CEO or president standpoint where you're developing hundreds of people in some cases, and I'm curious what it feels like for you.
What I find extremely rewarding is when I can develop people and I see them grow. Obviously, I would prefer that they grow in the company I work for, but sometimes they leave. And here's a good story. Now I told you I work in neurovascular now with my convention. 20 years ago, I started in neurovascular for Boston Scientific in Europe.
And I lost. Is that before it went to Stryker?
Yes. Oh, yeah. way before. Okay. Way before that. And at that point in time, I lost the sales manager of France to my convention, who was just starting to commercialize their products in Europe. And I put somebody from the finance department in France in charge as a sales manager in France. Well, guess what? Now, 20 years later, I come back to the same space. The guy who moved over to my convention has now retired as the VP for Europe. And the guy I put in charge as new sales manager of France is now the VP in Europe. So, so this, for me, this is super, super rewarding because it goes full circle. Another crazy story is in the early 2000s, when Boston Scientific launched their drug-eluting stents, they established a second sales force called the Therapy Development Specialist, different educational level. They wanted to really drive clinical messaging. There was one person in Germany, super bright, super educated, but not on his best social behavior, always rubbing up people the wrong way. And we gave him one warning, we gave him two warnings. Eventually, he was still in his 6 months probation period, and he had acted up again during a sales meeting. So I said, okay, fire him. So we fired him. A couple of days later, the guy calls me and says, I think I have learned something. Can I come back? I said, okay, well, Monday morning, 10 o'clock, my office. Okay, so the guy comes in and says, well, this is what I have learned. So I probe and probe and probe, and I rehired him. And he's still there, and he's still the best with anything that has to do with market development.
Really?
So that's probably the craziest thing I've ever done. Fire somebody only to hire him back like 5 days later.
Now, did he change on his own? Did you work with him to get him on some kind of program? Like how did that's a metamorphosis. Like, how did that happen?
So the large part was self-awareness on his part. And then really changing his behavior. I don't recall that we gave him any external coaching, or maybe we gave him an internal mentor, but I don't think we gave him an internal coach at the time. He wouldn't have been at the level to warrant that.
That's amazing, because there's something noble in forgiveness and giving somebody another opportunity, even though, quite honestly, they may not deserve it. For him to come back.
I'm usually not very good on second chances. Mm-hmm. I usually steer way clear of those. In this particular case, I made a different decision, and it turned out very well.
Fantastic. Now you put something in. It's funny. I never really look at your LinkedIn profile because I've known you for so long. But for some reason, I decided to take a peek at it the other day, and I saw there was an interesting comment from you about frontiers. And I thought that was a very interesting word, because I don't hear that often. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to explain your thoughts there, because it seems like that's something that would resonate with almost anyone.
Yeah. So it goes back a little bit to the 5th grade. In 5th grade, then I started to learn French, and in 7th grade, I had a school exchange. I was maybe 12 years old, and I needed to go into a French family in France. And believe it or not, for me, this was a life-changing experience, because they were noisy. It was dirtier than in Germany. You could eat with your hands. There was baguette. I mean, it was really sort of the quintessential French stereotype on put in front of a small town German kid. So it really opened my eyes, and boy, Jesus, there's more out here than what I'm living in my world. And ever since, I've tried to meet more new people, go out of my comfort zone, go into different countries, even if I don't know the language, if I don't know the people. So there's a print from the in the 1600s, when there was the debate, is the Earth flat or is the Earth round? There's somebody is putting his head out of the sky. So that has always stuck with me, and is a large motivation for me to always remain curious, seek new adventures, getting out of where I'm right now.
And so how does that trickle down to your children? How do you teach them that, or do they just watch you and they learn just from osmosis?
Both. But it's also fair to say that moving around has not worked in every case. It's also unsettling, because you do not have a group of friends for many years. So it's sometimes they like it. They're both extremely curious. They both very much like to meet new people, experience, learn new things. But I would also say that they will probably never move as much around as I have, because they would like to feel more grounded. They would like to have a place they can call home, and they lived at more than 5 years or so.
Yeah, for me, when I became a parent 17 years ago, I always felt that the most important thing to foster is curiosity. It's not coming to me now, but there was a Nobel Prize winner that when he gave his speech, he explained why he was the way he was. He said, because every day when he came home from school, his mother would only ask him one thing. She would say, "What questions did you ask today?" And so he grew up thinking that life is all about asking questions. And so I did the same thing with my kids. I created a monster. My daughter never stops, even at 17 years old. It's nonstop. But she questions everything. And it's been fantastic to watch, because he was absolutely right. It changes the entire way that my kids look at the world, just that one item. And so I agree with you. I think that curiosity is what opens the door for everything for them, whether it's travel or food or activities or friends or going to a university or who knows what. And it all comes from them saying, what is that? Yeah, I've been very fortunate. They took to that, and they're like I am. It's irritating at times, I'll tell you. But
yes, but keep it going. It will serve them well.
I think so. So far it has, and they haven't gotten in any trouble doing it. And so there's been a couple of times where I've had a call from a teacher trying to say, you might want to rein them in, and I say, no, I'm not reining them in, and so we'll work around it somehow. So we haven't talked about your wife much at all. In the last couple of minutes, I'd love to learn a little bit more about her. You say you met her in business school. Did she have a career at any point like yours, or what was her situation?
So the important thing there is she is officially French, but she's as British as she is French, because her mother was British and her father was from France. And she studied in England first to the bachelor, and then she switched to the same business school. So when we graduated together, the job market in France was very, very bad. So she never landed a permanent job back then. She had a succession of the temp positions, and then essentially she joined me in Taiwan in the 1990s. And then so she has not had a similar career as I have, but she has developed a totally different area of expertise and knowledge, because she's in the world of herbalist. She's a trained herbalist. She's a trained and certified animal communicator. She can do energy healing. She can do Reiki. So she's a totally different area now, much more on the intuitive, metaphysical, new age side.
It's a little yin and yang for you, and that's
Correct.
Terrific. And your kids get exposed to somebody who comes at things from a much different perspective. Now, can she communicate with any animal, or is that just for horses or just for dogs, or how does that work?
No, but she can do any animal, but she usually in most cases is cats, dogs, and horses.
It's fascinating. I could get her on here. I could talk about that for an hour, because I have 2 cats as well, and there are times I want to leave the door open and hope that they leave. They make me crazy. Every night they fight. They fight and scream and hiss and knock things over. It's every night. They're awful. Well, this has been a great conversation with Carsten Schroeder. Thank you from the family business, where family's what binds us. Carsten, you were fantastic.
Thanks very much for having me, Matt.
My pleasure.